Imagine it's 3 a.m. on the frozen front lines of World War II. Your breath hangs heavy in the night air. Your boots are soaked through, and every step tears at your frostbitten feet. You've heard the distant crack of gunfire all day, and you can't help asking yourself, will I freeze to death before the enemy gets me? The story of survival begins now, and it only gets harsher from here. You wake up to the stinging cold pressing against your face. Your breath, visible in the icy air, is slow at first, reluctant to leave the warmth of your chest. The ground beneath you feels unforgiving, less like dirt and more like solid stone, frozen overnight into an immovable slab. Every joint protests as you shift to sit up, and the stiffness in your legs tells you the cold hasn't just crept into your body, it's taken over. The first thing you notice is the smell. That damp combination of earth and sweat, layered with something metallic you'd rather not think about. There's a part of you that refuses to let your mind fully process it, but you already know what it is. This is the smell of war. It stays with you, clinging to the layers of your uniform, like a shadow you can't shake. And then the process of waking up begins. Not the kind where you yawn and stretch like you're getting out of bed at home, but the slow, aching kind that feels more like your body is pulling itself back from the dead. Your hands go to your boots first, or at least what's left of them. Once meant to carry you efficiently through all kinds of terrain, they've become as much an enemy as the one waiting on the other side of no man's land. The leather looks damp and stiff, a testament to the relentless cold, and the laces are like frozen ropes, impossible to manipulate, with fingers that have long since lost any sense of dexterity. You don't think of your feet as parts of your body anymore. They're miserable stumps, always wet, always sore, and always one step closer to falling apart entirely. But you grit your teeth and force those boots on, because the moment they come off completely, you know the fight is over. It's not just your fingers or your feet that have gone numb. There's a gnawing emptiness in your stomach, so sharp it feels personal, like someone is actively punishing you from the inside out. You've gotten used to the hunger. It comes with the territory, but that doesn't make it any easier. Your body craves something warm, something familiar. Instead, all you have is the memory of food, or maybe a dented tin of K-rations somewhere in your pack. Ham and eggs, if you're lucky, hardly enough to fill you, but just enough to remind you how far from home you really are. The trees around you seem indifferent to the suffering below. Their heavy branches, coated with snow, sway gently in the frozen air, as if this endless winter war is just another season to endure. But those same trees don't just provide shade, they hide dangers. The Germans could be out there, watching, waiting for the right moment. Maybe they already have their rifles trained on you, maybe today will be your last. That's the thought you fight off as you force yourself to your knees and start clearing away the snow that's piled on your gear during the night. It's hard to believe this is the same world you used to live in. Back in civilian life, mornings were about coffee, a warm bed, maybe the soft rumble of voices or a newspaper being read at the kitchen table. Here, it's the opposite. There's no comfort, no slow easing into the day. Every morning is a surprise party thrown by misery and dread, and even though you've been through it before, the cold finds new ways to shock you. It sinks deep into your bones, a reminder that it's not just the enemy you have to survive, it's the environment too. For many soldiers, mornings like these weren't just about physical discomfort. They chipped away at your mind too. You sit there in the snow, your breath fogging up like some kind of ghostly signal flare, and all you can think about is getting through the next 10 minutes. Once you've made it through those, maybe you'll think ahead to the next hour, and so on. Survival becomes a constant bargaining game with no prizes for winning except more cold and more fatigue. Campaigns like the Battle of the Bulge tested these limits to the breaking point. The cold wasn't just cold, it was unprecedented. Temperatures plummeting overnight felt like the air itself had turned against you. By morning, frost would form along the inside of your helmet, layering your breath in ice that slipped unnoticed into every crevice of your gear. Canteens became little blocks of unusable ice, and any thought of thawing them out was pointless. The soldiers who endured those mornings often spoke of the cold like a living, breathing creature, a second enemy that could break a man before the Germans even had the chance. And then there's the fear. You don't wake up in a place like this and forget you're in danger, not even for a second. Every sound is suspicious. The distant crack of a fallen branch, the unnatural click of something metallic, or even the soft murmur of men in their own foxholes. Everything feels like a prelude to disaster. You learned early on that silence could kill just as quickly as noise. Laying there in the trenches, you come to understand a cruel irony. The moments that feel the safest, the stillest, are often the ones right before all hell breaks loose. But you don't have the luxury of dwelling on it. Getting up, moving, preparing for whatever comes next. That becomes the first battle of the day. Your body begs you to stay where it is, pressed against the frozen ground that somehow feels warmer than the air above. You think about the weight of your pack, the aches in your shoulders, the slog of another march, and for a moment, you consider staying down. But then that thought passes, because giving in isn't an option. You roll over, clench your fists to get some feeling back in them, and start the painful crawl out of the foxhole. The forest begins to stir around you, as other soldiers do the same. You hear someone let out a muffled curse as they struggle with their boots. Another mutter something about frozen fingers. There's no conversation, no small talk, just the collective sound of men forcing themselves to carry on. Somewhere in the distance, artillery thunders, its deep roar rolling through the trees, like an ugly reminder of what's waiting for you today. Waking up in these conditions is like climbing a mountain without a peak in sight. There's no end to the grind, no summit to celebrate. Most of the time, the goal is just to survive another hour, another day, another night in a foxhole. But it never feels like you're making progress, only barely keeping up with the forces working to break you. And yet, against all odds, you climb anyway, because the alternative is to give up entirely. As you pull yourself to your feet and stretch out limbs that feel more like lead pipes than parts of your body, another truth settles over you. This is just the beginning. The worst is still ahead. The hunger, the frostbite, the fear gnawing at the edge of your thoughts. It will all compound as the day goes on, and the enemy isn't going to wait for you to finish getting ready. Deep down, you know you're walking a tightrope stretched over a pit. One misstep, and it could all come crashing down. But for now, all you can do is focus on the act of moving. Slipping your pack over your shoulders, brushing off the snow sticking to your coat, and crunching through the frost-covered earth one step at a time. This small, stubborn act of defiance, forcing your body forward when every part of it screams to stay down, feels like its own kind of victory. Still, as you join your comrades around you and begin pushing towards whatever's next, the question lingers. How do you keep going when every step feels like a battle? When your own body is betraying you and the enemy is only ever a few miles away? How do you summon the will to endure what comes next? That's the question every soldier wrestled with, even in the fleeting seconds between one breath and the next. What's worse, the cold air biting at your face, or the pain pulsating with every step you take? The battlefield wants you to believe it's the cold. But after weeks of wet socks, stiff boots, and flesh that no longer feels like it belongs to you, your body will remind you otherwise. At first, the pain feels distant, as if it's happening to someone else's feet. Then it creeps inward, turning to a numbness so complete it feels almost like relief. That's your first mistake. Numbness isn't a sign of recovery out here. It's the beginning of the rot. Trench foot. That's what the medics call it. The name's almost too innocent, too simple for what it really is. It starts small, with your toes turning pale, shrinking away from the light. The skin softens, taking on a sickly, waxy shine as the moisture trapped in your boots slowly begins to eat away at the flesh. Before long, tiny blisters form, each one a painful reminder that your feet are breaking down faster than they can heal. And then comes the smell, a thick, sour stench that clings, not just to your socks or your boots, but to the air around you. If it gets to this point, you know you've gone too far. The flesh starts to blacken, dying tissue taking over, and with it comes the crushing realization: your own body has become your enemy. It's hard to overstate the irony of it all. The boots strapped to your feet, the ones meant to protect you from the unforgiving terrain, are now at the root of your misery. They were issued to you as armor against the elements, yet the moment they became wet, either from rain, melting snow, or the sweat caused by days of non-stop marching, they were working against you. Wool socks, designed to keep you warm, weren't much better. When dry, they might pass as reliable, but once soaked, they felt more like sponges, trapping cold water next to your skin. It's not like you had the luxury to air out your feet either. A halt meant you risked falling behind. Falling behind meant, well, let's just say nobody waits for the slow ones out here. In fact, trench foot was so widespread that it sidelined more soldiers than bullets in some units. It wasn't just a medical condition, it was a crisis. Imagine this. Thousands of men during the brutal campaign of the Battle of the Bulge, trying to dig foxholes into ground harder than cement, kneeling in snow up to their knees, boots soaked all the way through. They knew what was coming. They didn't need the medics to confirm it. For many, the telltale signs, purple splotches, oozing blisters, were already starting to show by the first frost. That's when the marching became pure agony, step after step. Still, soldiers tried to fight back, in what little ways they could. Rags were wrapped around feet. Some shared socks, or pieces of socks really, with comrades who were worse off. They called it teamwork, but in reality, they were just trading one man's misery for another's. Others got creative, rubbing axle grease or candle wax over their toes in a desperate attempt to create some kind of barrier between skin and damp wool. Did it work? Barely. But just trying to do something, anything, made men feel like they hadn't entirely lost control. The small victories mattered, even out here. As we're living the Rabline carblers that he fi notice and nousen. One soldier wrote that his socks hadn't been dry since Christmas. Another described the dread that came each morning when it was time to lace up. Pulling on those boots felt like wringing out a wet towel, except the towel was your foot, and it bled. Vivid accounts like these paint a grim picture. Every soldier learned quickly that the pain wasn't going to go away. It was something they had to work through, push aside. They marched when they could, and when they couldn't, they limped. They did not see. They sensed the Tony to Riscad. The worst part? This wasn't something you could just shake off. Once the gangrene set in, that was it. Your body wasn't bouncing back. A field medic would take one look, shake their head, and call for the stretcher. Best case, you were going home with both feet. Worst case, well, sometimes losing a foot was a quicker way back to normalcy than trying to salvage it. And let's not ignore the psychological toll. Watching your comrades hobble along beside you, and knowing it could easily be you next, was a constant reminder of just how fragile you were out here. The trench foot wasn't just a physical enemy. It was a contributor to the quiet, creeping despair that followed soldiers everywhere. It whispered, even if the Germans don't get you, the ground will. The DEET, the marches over another official carburetors. And if you thought the pain ended once you were treated, think again. Wounded soldiers stretched out in hospital tents described the recovery process as its own kind of torture. First came the rinsing, where cold water was poured directly onto the sores. The feeling of thawing, of blood returning to dead tissue, was enough to bring tough men to tears. Then came weeks, sometimes months, of immobility, leaving soldiers to stew in their helplessness as their friends returned to the line. Hul Soj. They're not. But perhaps the most demoralizing effect of trench foot was the sense of betrayal. In war, you expect danger coming at you from the outside. Bullets, shells, an enemy moving through the fog. Those are the threats you mentally prepare for. But there's no preparing yourself for the moment. What makes this all the more horrifying is how preventable it should have been. With dry socks, better boots, or even a chance to properly rest their feet. So many soldiers could have avoided this slow, agonizing breakdown. But war doesn't wait for better supplies. By the time trench foot became a focus for military doctors, thousands of soldiers had already been affected. It was like trying to stop a flood after the dam had already broken. And while trench foot may be the standout ailment, it wasn't isolated. It interacted with everything else the battlefield threw at you. The hunger gnawed at your stomach while the cold chiseled away at your feet. The misery of one condition fed directly into the misery of the next. A soldier in the Pacific Theater might have to contend with the jungle rotting his boots apart, while a soldier in France was being frozen stiff. Both, however, would tell you the same thing. It was the conditions, not the enemy, that wore you down the fastest. And it wasn't just physical, it was morale. It's hard to feel like a hero when you're watching your toes dissolve into unrecognizable mush. The morning frost turns slush by noon, only to refreeze again at night. Cycle after cycle, soldiers had to maneuver through an environment that wanted nothing more than to claim their legs, one infected step at a time. Even the strongest men weren't immune. Sure, some people had better luck. Maybe their boots didn't leak as much. Maybe they had one extra pair of socks buried at the bottom of their bag. But for most men, no system, no preventative measure was airtight. At the Colmar pocket, where exhaustion mixed with freezing temperatures, trench foot became an almost guaranteed affliction. The ground was too hard to dig proper foxholes, meaning soldiers were forced to sleep exposed to the elements or crouch halfway into whatever meager pits they could chip away at. There weren't enough medics to go around, nor enough supplies to handle the steady flow of wounded. A breakdown in supply lines meant no fresh socks for weeks, as one soldier grimly pointed out. And worst of all, the relentless German counterattacks kept soldiers on their feet, moving, retreating, marching. To stop wasn't just disobedience, it was impossibility. So how did they cope? Well, the ones who could ignore the weight in their boots kept moving. And those who couldn't? They relied on the men around them. Trench foot, as demoralizing as it was, created an unspoken pact between soldiers. You help the guy who's limping today because you know tomorrow it could just as easily be you. Whatever rations they had were shared, tales of old ailments were told, and for a brief moment, camaraderie served as the only balm more effective than grease. Hunger is a quiet kind of torture. It doesn't roar in your ears like artillery fire or stab at you like a piece of shrapnel. Instead, it settles deep in your gut and sits there, clawing at you from the inside out. The worst part is how constant it is. No matter what you're doing, marching, digging a foxhole, dodging incoming shells, it's there, lingering, reminding you just how empty you are. And for soldiers in World War II, hunger was almost as much a part of their uniform as their helmets or rifles. Your day starts with whatever's left in your K ration. If you're lucky, and lucky is carrying a lot of weight here, it might be breakfast. A can of ham and eggs that somehow manages to taste like neither ham nor eggs, paired with a stack of crackers so hard they could probably stop a bullet. There's also instant coffee in there, but it's not coffee the way you know it. It's more of a vague, brown liquid that smells burnt and tastes about the same. If you've got powdered lemonade, congratulations. You've unlocked the refreshing option to choke on something both sour and chalky. You might also find cigarettes tucked alongside this sad excuse for breakfast, perhaps as a consolation prize for enduring the rest of it. The rations are functional above all else. They weren't made to make you happy, they were made to keep you alive, to fit neatly into a soldier's pack, and to last for months without spoiling. They were calorie-packed, dense little boxes designed to fuel your body through the unthinkable demands of war. But what they weren't was appetizing. And when you're eating the same combinations of canned meat, crackers, powdered drinks, and dry chocolate day after day, it stops feeling like food altogether. It's just fuel, tasteless and mechanical, like shoving coal into an engine. You eat because you have to, not because you want to. K rations were supposed to provide around 3,000 calories a day, enough to keep a soldier on their feet and moving forward. But trying to stomach them wasn't exactly easy. The cheese spread, for example, resembled cheese in the way that a distant memory resembles reality. It was a yellowish paste tucked into a tin, with a texture so gritty you wondered if sand had somehow been included in the recipe. And the meat? Let's just say that the canned meat and beans felt less like dinner and more like an unfortunate science experiment. Soldiers joked that it looked like a crime scene in a can, which, considering the alternative, wasn't entirely off the mark. And then there was the infamous D-ration chocolate bar, which wasn't really chocolate as much as it was a brick with a hint of cocoa. It was designed for endurance. It could survive in scorching heat, freezing cold, and God knows what else, except a soldier's teeth. Biting into it felt more like tackling a bar of iron, and any attempt to turn it into something edible involved breaking it apart and mixing it with water, assuming you had water to spare. Officially, the bar was meant to provide 600 calories in one compact package, but morale-wise, it felt like a cruel joke. Soldiers gave it the nickname Hitler's secret weapon because it seemed more likely to break your spirit than sustain you. Of course, food this uninspiring forced soldiers to get creative. With enough boredom and desperation, K rations could be transformed, or at least tweaked to become slightly less miserable. Crackers were mashed and fried on a canteen stove, turning them into makeshift pancakes. Powdered lemonade was diluted, twice if you were smart, to make it taste a little less like industrial cleaner. Soldiers traded what they didn't like. Ham and eggs were often swapped for cheese and crackers, cigarettes for chocolate. The trading became almost a second economy out on the front lines, a way to feel like you still had some control over what you put into your body. Sometimes, the longing for something real, something familiar, was so strong that soldiers took insane risks just for a taste. There's a story of one infantryman who traded his spare socks, an absolute luxury in conditions as wet and cold as Northern Europe, for a candy bar. When asked why, he just shrugged and said, "What good are socks if all I can think about is being hungry?" It might sound foolish, but that's what hunger does. It makes you choose between two bad options, and it always wins. The repetition of the rations wasn't just physically draining, it got inside your head. Imagine eating the same small, unsatisfying variations of cold canned meals every day for weeks, even months. The monotony alone could drive you to despair. It didn't take long before food stopped being about nourishment and started being a psychological battle. You weren't just hungry for calories. You were hungry for the comfort of a warm meal, for something homemade, for a reminder of the life you'd left behind. The rations weren't just bland. They were a reminder of everything you'd lost. And it wasn't just the lack of flavor that made it hard. Food scarcity on the front lines meant portions were often smaller than they should have been. Rations were designed to last a day, but that assumed you could afford to eat them all at once, which most soldiers couldn't. You had to ration your rations, stretching them across longer periods just in case the next supply line was delayed or cut off entirely. Soldiers learned to eat slowly, savoring every bite as if it might be their last for a while. But even then, that gnawing emptiness in their stomachs was never really satisfied. There were moments, though, when food became more than just survival. Soldiers shared meals as a way to bond, to remind themselves they weren't alone in this. Around a fire, or whatever passed for warmth, they'd trade jokes and stories while trying to choke down another can of meat, or wedge of cheese spread. It was in these small, fleeting moments that food stopped being just fuel and became something almost human again. They'd complain about the ham and eggs and laugh about the chocolate bar's concrete hardness, but it wasn't really the food they cared about. It was the sense of connection, the knowledge that they were in this together. But for every light-hearted moment, there were just as many, where hunger became unbearable. It gets under your skin, clouds your thinking, makes you weak both physically and mentally. Decisions that might have seemed simple on a full stomach became impossible while starving. How far could you march? How long could you dig? How much energy did you have left to lift your rifle when it mattered most? Hunger wasn't just a background discomfort. It actively made the horrors of war that much harder to endure. For soldiers stationed far from resupply points, or those caught in prolonged battles, the lack of food broke down more than just morale. It became a hazard. Starvation weakened their immune systems, made them more vulnerable to disease, and slowed down their ability to recover from wounds. It's hard to overstate just how important proper nutrition was, not for thriving but for surviving, and the rations, despite their flaws, were all that stood between soldiers and true starvation. You crouch low, just beneath the jagged edge of your foxhole, and you wait. There's no noise right now, no gunshots cracking through the air, no commands being barked. Just an eerie kind of silence that somehow feels louder than chaos. You grip your rifle tighter, your knuckles pale against the dark wood. You're listening. Every muscle in your body stays coiled, ready to move, but every nerve is screaming at you to freeze, to stay put. This is the balance you've been forced to master. Constant vigilance and total stillness. It's exhausting, both in body and mind. Fear hangs in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. It's not the kind of fear you experience in those sharp, chaotic glimpses when bullets fly or bombs drop. That fear, while immediate, is easy to understand. It's survival instinct. No, this is something deeper, heavier. It's the fear that never really leaves you. It follows you with every step, every breath, every quiet second where you think you might finally let your guard down. But you can't, because the moment you relax, the second you stop scanning the horizon or straining to hear some faint rustle in the trees, that's when it happens. Every shadow feels like a threat. A rustle in the bushes, it could be the wind, or it could be something much worse. A distant crack, maybe a snapping twig, or maybe a sniper setting their sights on you. You don't know, and that's the worst of it, uncertainty. It's an invisible force pressing down on you at all times. You find yourself jumping at the sound of your own breath, or the crunch of frost under your boots. It's not paranoia if the danger is real, and out here, it always is. In the frozen forests of the Colmar Pocket, the fear was especially thick. Picture this. You've been stuck in the same patch of trees for days, maybe weeks. It's cold, so cold that the ground's too hard to dig proper trenches. So you're improvising, huddled in shallow pits that barely keep you concealed. The enemy is somewhere out there, though where out there even begins is anyone's guess. German soldiers are moving through the trees, their silhouettes blending into the pine trunks. Sometimes you hear their voices. Sometimes it's just the crunch of their boots. Either way, the feeling is the same. You're being hunted, Artillery fire cuts through the air from time to time, the concussive blasts shaking snow loose from the branches above. Some soldiers describe it as deafening. Others would say it was worse when it stopped, leaving behind an unnerving quiet that stretched too long to be safe. Everyone knew what that silence meant. It wasn't a reprieve. It was the calm before the next attack. And when it came, it was fast, brutal, and utterly disorienting. A storm of gunfire would erupt from somewhere you didn't expect, pinning you down as your brain fought to catch up. Panic grabbed hold in these moments, holding your fear hostage. Some men would freeze entirely under this pressure, while others would scramble to return fire. Either way, you learned something about yourself during moments like that. Usually, it wasn't something you liked. Surviving fear like this wasn't about being brave. It was about endurance. Fear didn't go away, but you adapted to it. Soldiers developed rituals, little habits that gave them some sliver of control over the chaos. A lucky coin in their pocket, a pre-battle prayer, even carrying the dog tags of a fallen comrade as a kind of talisman. Anything to tip the scales, even if only in their own mind. Superstition thrived out here. You knew, logically, that carrying an ace of spades or double-checking your rifle 3 extra times wouldn't stop a bullet. But logic wasn't enough when the odds felt stacked against you. Then there was humor, bitter, dark, and essential. Soldiers joked about death all the time, not because it wasn't terrifying, but because making fun of it made it feel just a little smaller. There's a story about a unit pinned down under fire, their trench practically collapsing around them. One guy, in the middle of this chaos, yells out, "You'd think Jerry could at least give us a rain check." The whole trench erupts into laughter, even as dirt from the next incoming shell spatters over their helmets. It seems absurd, even callous, but humor like that is what kept them from spiraling. Laughing at fear didn't make it go away, but it took some of its power. And of course there was camaraderie. If fear was the weight on every soldier's shoulders, the men beside you made it lighter. You leaned on each other, sometimes literally, when exhaustion hit as hard as the cold did. The guy next to you wasn't just another body in a uniform. He was the one pulling you back into the foxhole when you tripped, reminding you to keep your helmet strapped tight, sharing his last cigarette with you as the frost began to settle in again. Connections forged in moments like these ran deep, because out here trust wasn't a luxury, it was survival. Fear alone might freeze you. Fear shared could help you move. Lieutenant Murphy was one such leader who embodied how camaraderie cut through fear. His unit trusted him completely, not because he gave rousing speeches, but because he stayed in the thick of it with them. During a standoff where artillery fire roared and counterattacks threatened to overrun their line, Murphy took charge, directing fire and rallying his soldiers to stand their ground. When someone you trust shows that kind of calm in chaos, it steadies you. And that's what he did. He steadied them. Men like Murphy were rare, but when you found one, you held on to the clarity and confidence they inspired. It could mean the difference between total panic and holding the line. But even if you survived the day, fear didn't simply shut off when night fell. That constant pressure didn't let up just because the sun dipped below the horizon. If anything, it worsened. The darkness, combined with the exhaustion you carried from days without proper sleep or food, made every sound sharper, every movement in the distance more threatening. When your body begged for rest, fear became the guardrail that kept you awake. You couldn't help wondering, would tonight be the night the Germans launched a surprise attack? Would artillery light up the trees while you slept? Or worse, while you didn't wake up? Living like that left scars, even for those who walked away from the war physically unharmed. Imagine being on edge for months, maybe years, training your brain to look for threats that could end your life in an instant. When it was all over, how do you unlearn that? For many veterans, you simply didn't. Fear came home with you. The tension in your muscles, the hyper-awareness that made you jump at the sound of a slamming door, it stayed. You might have left the war, but the war never really left you. And yet fear, as much as it pushed you to the brink, also shaped you. It wasn't just an enemy, though it often felt like one. It was a kind of teacher. It forced you to sharpen your instincts, to see danger before it even fully materialized. It forced you to adapt, to fight, to stay alive. You learned to count the little victories every time you dodged a sniper's bullet or lived through an ambush. Fear kept you moving because stopping wasn't an option. It wasn't a noble, cinematic sort of bravery. It was raw determination, built in the shadows of survival. But no lesson, no amount of adaptation made fear any easier to live with. It loomed over every decision, every action, even every moment of rest you tried to steal. Survival was never a guarantee. It wasn't even a fair chance some of the time. All you had was what you'd learned to lean on. Your instincts, your rituals, your brothers in arms. And sometimes, that was just enough to make it through the next 24 hours. You lie as still as you can in your foxhole, listening to the night. The cold earth beneath you feels harder than stone, pressing into your back like it's trying to swallow you whole. Your rifle sits propped nearby, close enough for you to grab it in an instant. Above, the night stretches out like a frozen canvas, stars glinting faintly through the bare branches. It would almost be peaceful if not for the sounds, distant gunfire, the occasional rumble of artillery, and the groaning of frozen branches bending under the weight of snow. Sleep is the goal, but it's more of an idea than a certainty. Out here, closing your eyes is both a necessity and a gamble. And yet, you have to sleep. It's not a choice. Your body, running on fumes and stretched beyond its limits, demands it. It doesn't care that the enemy might be less than 100 yards away. It doesn't care that an ambush could explode into chaos at any moment. Exhaustion presses heavier on you than the cold does. Your hands, stiff and numb, have barely enough strength left to tighten the worn straps of your coat around your chest. Even your thoughts seem sluggish, weighed down by days of hunger, frostbite, and the kind of fatigue that no amount of rest can fully fix. You try to force yourself to relax, but the tension never fully leaves. How could it? The risk is everywhere. Sleeping out here means trusting someone else to stay awake, and that might be the hardest part. On one side of you is a fellow soldier whose head keeps nodding forward, his eyes fluttering shut until he jerks himself awake. On the other side is someone muttering softly into the dark, talking to no one in particular as fear keeps them wired. It feels like everyone is balancing precariously on the edge of collapse. You tell yourself it's okay to close your eyes, just for a moment, but your body doesn't believe it. The foxhole offers some layer of protection, but not much. The muddy walls, half frozen and crumbling, feel like the thinnest shield against the dangers surrounding you. You tug your helmet down lower over your ears, hoping to block out the worst of the noise. If you're lucky, the distant gunfire becomes something muted in the background, a sound you can almost ignore. But more often than not, there is no escaping it. Every burst reminds you where you are, who you're fighting, and just how fragile your sense of security really is. Comfort is a foreign concept out here, but you do what you can. Your helmet, heavy and cold, sometimes doubles as a pillow. If it's particularly bitter, you and a couple of others might huddle close together for warmth, sharing a few degrees of body heat under coats that weren't built to withstand this kind of cold. Every now and then, you find a patch of ground that isn't as frozen as the rest, just soft enough to give your aching back the illusion of something resembling a bed. But some nights, even those scraps of comfort are impossible. There are nights when the quiet is shattered by artillery fire, distant at first, then creeping closer until it's your front line being lit up. The horizon seems to erupt as shells explode in rapid succession, tearing up branches and throwing columns of snow and dirt into the air. The ground beneath you shakes in waves, like it's alive and threatening to spit you out. The rumble is deafening, each blast punching through your chest with its sheer force. There's no sleep during times like these, only the futile effort to keep from panicking. You've heard soldiers describe it as a storm, and that feels almost accurate. The way it rolls in without warning, swallowing the night whole. The difference, though, is that real storms leave you in awe of nature's power. This one just leaves you shattered, crouched lower in your foxhole, as if you could somehow disappear into the earth itself. You've gotten used to the sound on some level, the deep thud in the distance, the rhythm of destruction, but the closer it gets, the less prepared you ever feel. The waiting, the realization that one stray shell could very well be fatal, is worse than the noise. Worse still, after the barrage fades, the silence that follows feels unbearable. It's not peaceful, it's eerie, oppressive. Your mind refuses to trust it, racing to fill the void. Is the enemy advancing now? Are they waiting for you to stick your head up first? Those questions swirl as you sit there, breathing shallow, sweat freezing against your skin. The barrage might have kept you awake, but the silence ensures you won't sleep for hours after it's over. It's strange, though. Exhaustion often wins, even in the worst conditions. Eventually, your body betrays your fear and forces your eyes to close, even if only for minutes at a time. Sleep out here is less about true rest and more about stolen moments. You slip into it without realizing, only to be jolted awake by the sound of boots crunching outside or the far-off drone of engines. And in the rare stretches where sleep actually comes, it's never deep enough to refresh you fully. Dreams, when they happen, never offer much relief. They're more like warped reflections of your reality, unsettling, chaotic, and soaked in that same feeling of danger. Still, sleep matters. Everyone knows it. You've seen it written on your comrades' faces, the way they stumble through tasks after too many nights without real rest. Lieutenant Murphy even said it out loud once, telling the unit to get some rest one night during a lull. He knew what tomorrow would bring. They all did. Sleep, fragile and fleeting as it was, kept you going. Without it, the already uphill battle became insurmountable. And while you might not dream of comfort, you'd take any scrap of reprieve you could get. But make no mistake, these restless nights added up. Each one chipped away at you, leaving cracks that never fully healed. By the time the campaign stretched into its third or fourth week, the lack of proper sleep showed in every step you took. Your legs felt heavier, your feet dragged, and your rifle, already too familiar a weight, seemed unbearable by the end of the day. You were slower to react, a step behind in situations where being a step ahead might have saved your life. The war wasn't just wearing you down physically, it was grinding away at your spirit. And yet, for all its risks, sleep remained one of the few escapes soldiers had. During rare moments of calm, when the night was still and the stars were visible above, sleep became more than just survival. It was an act of rebellion, as if closing your eyes and letting the world fall away, even for an hour, was your own small victory against the reality of war. The frozen ground wasn't just a brutal bed anymore. It was a temporary exit from everything waiting for you when you woke. You catch yourself looking up at the night sky sometimes, tracing constellations you used to know before all of this. The stars don't change. They're the same ones you saw back home, from your own backyard, when the only sounds were the crickets and the wind in the trees. In those brief moments, you're reminded of everything that feels so impossibly far away now. Home, warmth, safety. And it's that memory that helps you surrender to sleep when you can. Because for however brief the escape is, it's one you'll gladly take. But the war has a way of not letting you lose yourself completely. You wake up abruptly, your mind snapping back to attention like an alarm just went off. You're not sure what woke you. The shifting of a nearby soldier? A faint sound outside the foxhole that didn't belong? It doesn't matter. Your heart is pounding now, lungs working overtime as your brain races to catch up. Your hands instinctively reach for your rifle. You're awake, fully and painfully alert, and every muscle in your body screams that sleep is no longer an option. By the time the sun creeps up over the horizon, painting the frozen fields in dull gray light, you're already bracing yourself for the day ahead. The hollow feeling in your chest tells you that whatever scraps of sleep you managed aren't nearly enough. But that's how it always is. Sleep out here isn't about waking up refreshed. It's about waking up at all. And at the end of this day, after the marches, the gunfire, and the ever-present fear, you'll find yourself back in this same foxhole, staring up at the same unchanging stars. You'll wrestle with the exhaustion, tempted to shut your eyes but terrified of letting go. Because out here on the front lines, sleep is never just sleep. It's a calculated risk, a necessity, and, above all, a reminder of how far you are from peace. The life of a World War II soldier wasn't just about dodging bullets and capturing enemy lines. It was about surviving everything else. The earth they stood on became an enemy. Cold, hunger, exhaustion, a gnawing fear that never loosened its grip. It all worked to wear them down. Victory wasn't about glory, it was about enduring. Yet, they found ways to hold on to their humanity. A cigarette passed between hands, a laugh shared in the face of danger, or even a jar of cherries split amongst comrades. These moments of connection mattered. Their resilience echoes forward. What other stories wait to be uncovered?